Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was upon a particularly dismal November evening that I found myself once more ensconced in the familiar confines of Baker Street, the hearth ablaze and the windows veiled in thick, clinging fog. The gas lamps along the thoroughfare below flickered with a sickly pallor, their glow absorbed by the oppressive gloom that seemed to hang over London like a shroud. Holmes stood before the fire, his lean figure silhouetted against the flames, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, and his eyes half-lidded in that curious state of wakeful introspection that signalled a mind without stimulation. "There is an unmistakable dreariness in the air, Watson," he remarked, without lifting his gaze. "The city slumbers in mediocrity, not a single telegram, not a footfall upon the stair, only the monotony of civilized existence gnawing at the marrow. I knew better than to engage in idle chatter when Holmes was in such a mood. He required a mystery, as another man might require air, and in its absence, his faculties turned inward with dangerous precision. It was, as I've often observed, the quiet before the storm, those rare and unnerving lulls that preceded his most astonishing cases. Yet even as the clock struck 7, I could not have foreseen the singular figure who would soon mount our stairs, bringing with him the scent of damp wool, desperation, and the first tremors of a conspiracy that would reach into the very heart of the empire. The door opened with an abruptness that startled even Holmes, and a gaunt man stepped into the room, his overcoat soaked to the hem, his breath visible in the cold air behind him. He removed his hat with trembling hands and cast anxious glances toward the window, as though fearful of some unseen pursuer. "My name is Reginald Thwaite," he said in a voice hushed and hurried. I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, but I am given to believe you are the only man in London who might make sense of what I have witnessed." Holmes gestured for him to sit, his manner transforming at once from ennui to alertness. "Pray, continue, Mr. Thwaite. You are among friends." Thwaite settled on the edge of the armchair, every inch of him taut with dread. "I am a clerk at the Home Office, attached to the Bureau of Domestic Affairs. Nothing glamorous, mostly logistical records, routing of internal correspondence, that sort of thing. Until last week, I had never imagined anything untoward occurring behind those walls. And now," Holmes prompted, "I believe I have stumbled upon a plot, something deep, organized and treasonous in nature. I have reason to believe that one of our own is transmitting secrets, perhaps to a foreign power. But what alarms me most, Mr. Holmes, is that I am not the first to suspect it, and the man who did, a colleague of mine, has disappeared." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Disappeared, you say? Under what circumstances?" "That's just it," Thwaite said hoarsely. "No one will speak of it. It's as if he never existed at all." It was only when Holmes inquired as to the nature of Thwaite's suspicions that the full peculiarity of the matter began to unfold. The clerk drew from his coat a folded slip of paper, yellowed and brittle at the edges, and handed it across with a hand that shook. "I found this in my colleague's desk drawer, hidden beneath the false bottom. The handwriting is not his, of that I'm certain." Holmes unfolded the note with care, examining it first with the naked eye, then with his lens. The message was brief, the ink smeared but legible. "Drop below Westminster at the third toll." "Curious," murmured Holmes. "A precise instruction, sufficiently vague to elude casual discovery, yet pointed enough to those in the know. What prompted you to search the desk?" Thwaite hesitated. He had confided in me, subtly at first, small remarks about late-night visitors to the building, irregularities in the secure document logs. One evening, he failed to arrive at our usual tea. When I asked after him, I was told he'd been reassigned, but no such records existed. "And so you investigated," Holmes said approvingly. "And what of this location? Westminster Bridge?" Thwaite swallowed. "I fear it may be a rendezvous point, or worse, a drop site, the kind used by those dealing in secrets." Holmes stood abruptly and began pacing. A cipher hidden beneath furniture, an unidentified hand, and a reference to one of London's most symbolically charged landmarks. "Mr. Thwaite, you were right to come to us." Watson, too, felt a chill creeping into his limbs, though whether from the weather or the words, I could not be sure. Thwaite's voice quavered as he continued. "I attempted to raise my concerns with Sir Arthur Fenwick, our division head. He dismissed me outright, called it fantasy, but I know what I saw. And now I fear I may be followed." Holmes's expression grew grave. "You mentioned your colleague. What was his name?" "Percival Langley. A quiet man, methodical, not prone to imagination. When he failed to appear for 3 consecutive days, I grew worried. I made inquiries at his lodgings. No sign of him. The landlady claimed he left in the night and never returned." "And yet no investigation?" I asked incredulously. "None. It was as if the department wanted him gone." Holmes paused at the window, staring into the thickening fog. "It is not uncommon, Watson, for the most treacherous of plots to thrive under the guise of bureaucracy. Mr. Thwaite, your instincts may well have preserved your life. The forces you've stumbled upon appear both organized and embedded within the machinery of government." Thwaite's hands clenched the armrest of his chair. "Then you believe me?" Holmes turned, his gaze sharp as flint. "I believe the fog is thickest where the secrets are deepest, and Westminster is a place of shadows." With that, he rang for Mrs. Hudson and requested his coat and walking stick. "You mean to go out?" I asked. "Indeed. The river is high tonight, Watson, and Westminster waits." And so, as the city shivered beneath its grey veil, Holmes took his first steps into what would become one of the most perilous and politically sensitive investigations of our long career together. The following morning, under a veil of one winter light, Holmes and I made our way by hansom to Whitehall, where the grey edifice of the Home Office loomed with all the implacable indifference of the state. Holmes, as ever, moved with the air of a man both belonging to and subtly contemptuous of the bureaucratic world we now entered. Sir Arthur Fenwick received us in a panelled office that reeked of pipe smoke and formality. He was a man of stern countenance and cultivated moustache, with a manner that could chill even the most righteous indignation. He did not rise as we entered, but regarded Holmes with the tired disinterest reserved for cranks and minor nuisances. "You'll forgive me, Mr. Holmes," he said, steepling his fingers, "but I fail to see the merit in entertaining fantasies from clerks with a penchant for melodrama." "Is it your assertion," Holmes asked evenly, "that Mr. Thwaite's concerns are wholly fabricated?" "I am asserting," said Sir Arthur, "that he has allowed the dullness of his duties to cloud his reason. The man has always been a nervous sort. His missing colleague was likely reassigned. A matter of internal protocol, not for public discussion." But you deny the existence of any note, Holmes continued, or any suspicion of disloyalty within your department. There is no conspiracy, Mr. Holmes, Sir Arthur snapped. Only men like yourself who see phantoms in fog. Holmes made no reply. He rose with quiet civility and offered a slight bow. Thank you, Sir Arthur. Your candour is, if nothing else, most enlightening. Once outside, Holmes lit his pipe and exhaled slowly. An intelligent man feigning indifference is a thing to watch, Watson. Sir Arthur knows more than he dares admit. His eyes gave him away. Then what now? I asked. Now, Holmes said, eyes narrowing, we let the river speak. That evening, Holmes appeared in an altogether different guise, stooped, unkempt, and draped in the ragged garb of a city vagrant. It was a disguise I had seen him don with unsettling ease on more than one occasion. I was to keep a safe distance, observing from the shadows near the embankment, while he wandered beneath Westminster Bridge with the gait of a man who had long forgotten warmth or purpose. The air was damp with mist and reeked of the Thames, a foul mixture of brine and industrial discharge. The gas lamps cast watery reflections across the black surface of the water, and the heavy silence was broken only by the distant rattle of carriage wheels and the solemn toll of Big Ben. It was as the clock struck 11 that Holmes stiffened. Though feigning sleep beneath a crumbling archway, I noted that his head tilted slightly toward the third pillar of the bridge. A moment later, I too heard it, a peculiar echo different from the usual reverberations of the bell tower. It was as though the third toll, and only the third, struck a deeper note that lingered a moment too long. When Holmes later rejoined me, he appeared quietly pleased. You heard it? He asked, brushing soot from his sleeves. That echo, yes. But what of it? It is a subtle thing, Holmes said, but a deliberate one. The construction of the third pillar conceals a hollow space, Watson, an acoustic chamber of sorts. And I'd wager it is no accident that the signal mentioned by Thwaites' note aligns precisely with that toll. And what does it mean? That someone, he replied, is using the resonance as a signal, likely to coordinate something beneath the bridge. But for whom? Holmes smiled faintly. That, my dear Watson, is the question we must answer next. The following 2 nights were spent in observation, Holmes alternating between the rags of the London vagabond and the heavy overcoat of a Thames dockhand. I, for my part, remained concealed some distance off, armed with a field glass and a flask of brandy, the latter doing little to stave off the damp, which crept into one's bones like an illness. It was on the second of these nights that we observed something of note. Precisely at 11, as the third toll of Big Ben faded across the black surface of the Thames, a flat-bottomed boat emerged silently from the southern bank, its lanterns extinguished, its hull low in the water. 2 figures sat aboard, one rowing with the steady rhythm of long practice, the other seated at the bow, watching the shoreline with hawk-like vigilance. They are too precise to be smugglers, Holmes murmured beside me, barely audible over the hush of the tide. And too deliberate to be mere wanderers of the river. Observe how they approach the third pillar, never the first or second, and how the boat's position aligns exactly beneath the central arch. Indeed, the vessel drew alongside the bridge, and for several minutes its crew remained motionless, save for a single flash of light, brief, faint, and pointed downward, as though signalling into the dark beneath. They're looking for something, I whispered. No, Holmes corrected softly. They are expecting something, or someone. As the chimes of a nearby church announced the quarter hour, the boat silently withdrew, vanishing into the southward mist as quickly as it had come. Holmes exhaled. There is method in their appearances, Watson. It is not a matter of chance, but of routine, and that implies structure, coordination, perhaps even treason. And what shall we do? He turned to me with a look I had come to recognize all too well. We shall go beneath the river. It was not long after our eerie river vigil that Holmes turned his attention to the underworld of the city, those ancient neglected corridors and vaults that lie hidden beneath its surface like veins beneath flesh. By leveraging one of his more obscure connections, an inspector of metropolitan works with a fondness for Turkish tobacco, Holmes acquired access to a disused entry point beneath the Victoria Embankment. We descended late one afternoon into the cold, dripping underbelly of Westminster, accompanied only by the flickering light of Holmes's lantern and the echo of our own footsteps. The brick walls we passed bore the mossy scars of age and moisture, and at intervals we encountered rusted grates, old signage, and once, most curiously, a steel door with no handle. It was here that Holmes knelt, removing a small iron tool from his coat. "Someone has been here within the past week," he said. "Note the disturbance of this silt, too fresh to have settled naturally. And see here. What do you make of this?" He pried something loose from beneath the lip of the doorway, a fragment of parchment, stiff with damp, but still bearing the faded lines of what was clearly a cartographer's hand. "A map?" I asked. "More than that," he replied. "A section of an access plan, pre-war design. It shows routes beneath Parliament itself, once thought sealed since the construction of the new embankment. And yet someone is using them again." Holmes nodded gravely, which suggests a conspiracy not merely hidden, but institutional, someone with knowledge, access, and a purpose. We emerged from the tunnel sometime near dusk, the city above us unchanged and unaware. But below, far below, London's forgotten arteries stirred once more with movement. "There," Holmes said, holding the map fragment to the light, "is where our answers lie." Holmes had always held a healthy skepticism for the ease with which officials attributed suspicious events to anarchists and foreign provocateurs. It was, he once remarked, the lazy man's scapegoat, useful, unspecific, and perfectly suited to cloak one's own ignorance. Yet when a certain Inspector Doran of Special Branch approached Holmes with word of a seditious pamphlet found in the possession of a junior clerk from the Home Office, the very same bureau to which Thwaite was attached, I noticed Holmes's brow arch with interest. The pamphlet, printed in French and smeared with ink, bore an inflammatory title and made veiled references to corruption within the government. According to Doran, it had been recovered during a raid on a cellar in Spitalfields, a known haven for anarchist sympathisers. "The man we detained," Doran said, "claims to have met a Langley at one of their late-night meetings. Tall, quiet fellow, matches your description. Vanished not long after." Holmes requested the man's name, and we were granted leave to question him the following morning. The interview, however, proved underwhelming. The suspect, a stonemason by trade, spoke with more fear than conviction, and when Holmes pressed him on the supposed identity of this Langley, the man stammered and looked to the inspector for guidance. The exchange left Holmes singularly unimpressed. Later, as we sat in the corner of a smoke-filled coffee-house in Holborn, Holmes removed his gloves slowly and set them beside his untouched cup. "The pamphlet is genuine," he said, "but the connection to Langley is not. We are being misdirected, Watson. Deliberately. You believe it was planted? I do. Consider. The pamphlet leads us to anarchists, the anarchists to Langley, and Langley is presumed to have vanished. But what does this achieve? To discredit Thwaite's suspicions, I offered. Precisely, Holmes replied. By associating the matter with a well-known criminal element, the conspirators hope to undermine the credibility of anyone who stumbles too close. If we pursue the anarchist trail further, we do their work for them. But why go to such lengths? Holmes leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because the truth is worse than anarchists, Watson. It lies within the walls of power, and those who dwell there understand the art of camouflage. It was a chilling thought, that the machinery of state might itself be turned against the pursuit of truth. Yet even more unsettling was the ease with which falsehood had been laid in our path. As we departed the coffee house, Holmes offered no further comment, but I observed the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against the handle of his cane, a sure sign that the wheels of deduction were turning rapidly. That evening, as we returned once more to Baker Street, a palpable silence settled over Holmes. He did not touch his violin, nor reach for his monographs, nor retreat to his pipe. Instead, he stood by the fire, gazing into the coals with that peculiar expression I had seen only in the most delicate of cases, a mixture of calculation and something I could not easily name. For my part, I felt a weight growing steadily upon my chest. Though I was no stranger to danger, indeed, I had accompanied Holmes through alleyways and gunfire more times than propriety would suggest. There was something uniquely unsettling about this affair. It was not the violence that troubled me, but the depth of secrecy, the sense of walls closing in with neither sound nor warning. And yet Holmes remained implacable. "You are disturbed, Watson," he said, without turning. I hesitated. "Holmes, this matter, it touches upon the highest institutions, and Thwaite, he is no agent, he is a simple man. I fear for him." "As do I," Holmes admitted softly. "But emotion, however noble, must not distort judgment. Our path is not through sentiment, but through logic. If Thwaite is in danger, we must act, but only with certainty." "And do you possess it?" "Not yet," he replied, "but we are close. The boat, the bridge, the acoustic signal, these are not improvised affairs. They belong to a pattern, a machine. You speak of a conspiracy." "I speak," Holmes said, "of a mechanism so precise that it requires only a single flaw, one loose cog, to reveal its inner workings. Mr. Thwaite may be that cog, and if he has vanished—" He trailed off. I did not press him further. That night I found it difficult to sleep. My dreams were crowded with dark rivers, voiceless men beneath bridges, and a sound, a low tolling bell, that echoed far longer than it should. The morning following our grim reflections was darkened still further by the news that Mr. Reginald Thwaite had vanished. I had called upon his lodgings in Lincoln's Inn on Holmes's suggestion, only to be met by a landlady with furrowed brow and trembling fingers. According to her account, he had not returned the previous night, nor had he left word of his destination. I brought the news to Holmes immediately, finding him poring over a railway timetable with a copy of the Pall Mall Gazette beside him. His face betrayed no visible surprise, only a tightening of the jaw that, to me, revealed more than words might have done. "Gone?" he said softly. "Without a trace," I confirmed. "His bed unslept, his coat still on the peg. The landlady says he had been unsettled, frightened even. She recalls him pacing his room late into the night." Holmes rose and went to the fireplace, where he stood with hands clasped behind his back. "Precisely the result I feared," he murmured. "We were not quick enough." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson appeared with a small envelope. unmarked save for the name Mr. Sherlock Holmes scrawled in a crude hand. Holmes took it without comment and slit it open. Inside was a single sheet, upon which were printed the words, "Tell your bloodhound to heel, or he'll end up in the river next." Holmes read it aloud without inflection, then passed it to me. "They're watching us," I said, a chill settling in my bones. "They are aware of our presence," Holmes corrected, "but not, I think, of our reach." "What now, Holmes?" He turned to me with that keen, merciless clarity that always signalled a pivot in the investigation. "Now, Watson, we find the next thread, before it too is cut. And if they believe fear will deter me, they have gravely misjudged their quarry." It was the following evening, as Holmes and I sat in the parlour discussing our next course, that a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a calling card upon a tray. Miss Marguerite Langley. Holmes's expression shifted subtly. He gestured for her to be admitted. The young woman who entered was composed, but her eyes held the kind of sorrow born of prolonged strain. She wore no mourning band, though it was clear she had come with purpose, not grief. "I hope I am not intruding," she began, "but I believe you are seeking my brother, Percival Langley." Holmes inclined his head. "You are not mistaken, Miss Langley. We have reason to believe he has become entangled in a matter of national consequence." She took the seat Holmes indicated and drew from her reticule a small packet of papers. I feared as much. He left these behind, hidden in the false lining of his travel case. I discovered them only yesterday when his landlord returned the contents of his room. Holmes unfolded the pages with care. They were fragments from a personal diary, passages of cryptic notation interspersed with observations. Tuesday, second meeting beneath the bridge. Code phrase delivered. Alton was present. Friday, they speak in riddles, cathedral silence, and the toll's third voice. Langham's signature was on the manifest, impossible to miss. Holmes studied them silently, lips pressed thin. "These are more than musings," he said. "They are breadcrumbs through a labyrinth." "Do you believe he is alive?" she asked, her voice low. "I believe," Holmes replied, "that your brother knew the risks of the path he walked and left us a lantern to follow." Miss Langley's eyes shone with something close to gratitude. Holmes gathered the papers and stood. "Watson, the walls are thinner than we thought. Parliament is not merely built upon old stone. It is built upon secrets." I have seldom known Holmes to exhibit the quiet satisfaction he did upon examining the diary fragments. There was no exclamation, no dramatic proclamation, only the steady narrowing of his eyes and the faint twitch of a smile at the corner of his mouth, as though a clock he had long been winding had begun at last to tick. "These entries," he said, "are more than they appear. Note how each allusion corresponds to a location or a signal: cathedral silence, the third toll, the manifest. They are code, Watson. Deliberate signals exchanged amongst those who meet not in drawing rooms, but in shadow." "But for what purpose?" I asked. "For what purpose indeed?" he echoed. "And more crucially, how often?" Holmes spent the next hour scribbling furiously upon a sheet of foolscap, cross-referencing dates and passages. At last, he turned to Miss Langley, who had sat quietly throughout. "Miss Langley, may I ask if you would be willing to play a most dangerous role in the pursuit of justice?" She met his gaze without flinching. "If it will bring my brother to light, yes." "Then we shall use you as a pawn, but knowingly and safely. You will deliver a message written in your brother's hand. It will suggest that a crucial dossier is to be passed beneath Westminster Bridge at midnight, at the third toll. The message will be intercepted, Of that we may be sure. They will take the bait. Will they not see through it? I asked. They may suspect, Holmes replied, but they cannot afford to ignore it. The risk of exposure or betrayal within their ranks will force them to act. He dispatched the note through a channel he refused to share, then sent word to Inspector Lestrade, requesting 2 men of his choosing and complete discretion. That evening, Holmes laid out his plan with mechanical precision. We must reach the embankment before 10, he said. From there, we position ourselves beneath the western arch. Lestrade and his men will cover the southern approach. Once the boat arrives, we wait for the exchange. Then we close the jaws. And if it's a trap for us? I asked. Holmes smiled coldly. Then I trust the river will prove less hospitable to them than to us. It was 11:15 when we took our positions, crouched in the gloom beneath Westminster Bridge. The tide was sluggish but rising, and the chill in the air seemed to press more heavily with each passing moment. I could make out the faint outline of Lestrade and his constables beneath a crumbling stairwell, their shapes just visible in the dim lantern glow of the opposite arch. Holmes, seated beside me on a slick stone ledge, held a small chronometer in his palm, checking it against the tolling of the bell. They are never early, he murmured. They are too disciplined for that. At the 3rd chime of midnight, a soft plash of oars broke the silence. A boat emerged from the gloom, black-hulled, unlit, and ghostly in its glide. 3 men stood aboard. All wore masks, plain, featureless cloth that robbed them of identity. One held a parcel. Another scanned the darkness with a lantern, which he flicked thrice in succession. The signal from the diary, I whispered. Holmes nodded. Stand ready. The boat coasted to the pillar directly before us and paused. One man leapt ashore with surprising agility, carrying the parcel. He walked forward several paces, knelt, and placed the object on the stone in silence. Then he waited. Holmes remained motionless. Moments passed, 10, perhaps 20, and then a faint voice called out from the boat. No contact! Fall back. At once the figures turned to retreat. Now, Lestrade! Holmes barked, leaping forward. A shout went up, followed by the thunder of footsteps. One of the masked men drew a revolver and fired wildly into the darkness, but the shot ricocheted harmlessly from the arch. Lestrade's men surged in from either side, and within seconds, 2 of the men were subdued. The third, swifter than his companions, fled into the shadows, disappearing through an old maintenance gate that led into the substructure of Parliament itself. Holmes turned to me. That one, he said, is our spider. I gave chase at once, with Holmes but a pace ahead, his form darting through the stone corridors like a shadow unbound. The fugitive had vanished down a rusted iron stairwell leading to the subterranean passages that twisted like arteries beneath Westminster. It was a place seldom spoken of, even by the architects who maintained it, constructed in the days of steam and secrecy, long since walled up in the name of progress. We plunged into the gloom without hesitation, the echo of our footfalls swallowed by the dampness clinging to the stone. The air was close, metallic with the scent of rust and old coal. Somewhere ahead, we heard the splash of hurried steps across shallow water, then silence. Listen, Holmes said, raising a hand. He has stopped. An ambush? I asked. Possibly, or confusion. These tunnels do not forgive hesitation. We pressed on, following faint scuff marks and droplets that gleamed faintly where Holmes's lantern beam struck them. At a junction where 3 tunnels met, Holmes crouched. Here, he murmured, indicating a torn scrap of fabric snagged on a protruding nail. He passed this way, and in haste. A sudden clang echoed from the rightmost corridor. A heavy gate slammed shut, followed by a rattling lock. We veered toward the sound, pushing through a narrow arch until we reached a rusted iron door, freshly disturbed. Holmes produced a length of wire from his breast pocket, his fingers working swiftly at the lock. "It will take him only moments to vanish further into the system," he said. "We must reach him before he doubles back." The door creaked open with a groan of protest, revealing a short passage that led into a round chamber lined with old gas fittings and ancient pipework. A faint trail of footprints in the dust led inward. Then came the voice. "Not one step further, Mr. Holmes." We halted. The man stood at the far end of the chamber, still masked but holding a revolver levelled at us with practiced precision. Behind him, a rusted valve wheel led to what must have been another escape route. His breath came quick, but his hand did not waver. "You're clever," he said, "but cleverness isn't enough when you walk into another man's theatre." Holmes stepped forward, utterly unshaken. "On the contrary," he replied, "the final act has already begun, and I never take the stage without knowing how the curtain falls." The masked man's eyes flickered for a moment. Then Holmes threw the lantern. It struck the wall beside the man with a burst of light and smoke. I lunged forward as the chamber filled with confusion, and the man fired, once, twice, missing both times before Holmes had him pinned against the wall, the weapon knocked clean from his grasp. Lestrade arrived seconds later, breathless but grinning. "Well played, Holmes. You flushed him out like a badger." Holmes removed the mask. I gasped aloud. There, beneath the rough cloth, was the unmistakable visage of Sir Alton Fenwick, the very man who had looked down his nose at us days before, dismissing Thwaite's fears as the fantasies of a nervous clerk. He stared at Holmes with eyes that had lost their earlier superiority. The mask was gone, but the veneer of power remained, cracked, yet stubbornly clinging to the remnants of its old authority. "I should have burned those notes," he muttered. But Langley, he was cleverer than I expected. Holmes's voice, when he spoke, was low and devoid of triumph. "You betrayed your country, Sir Alton, not for ideology, not for justice, but for money. Or was it simply the thrill of subversion that drew you in? Do you think the empire is sacred?" Fenwick spat. "It's a carcass, corrupt, bloated, blind to the world. I merely ensured I profited while the rest clung to illusion." "And what of Thwaite?" I demanded. "Where is he?" "He lives," Fenwick replied, his tone bitter. "We never intended to kill him, only to frighten him into silence. But he proved stubborn." Lestrade's men shackled him then, leading him away through the tunnels as Holmes and I stood in silence. At last, Holmes turned to me. "The loudest deceivers often wear the quietest collars." "And Parliament?" I asked. "They will bury this," he replied. "For the good of the realm, of course. There will be no trials, no headlines, only silence, and a reshuffling of names on parliamentary doors." As we made our way out of the darkness and into the cold air above, I felt the Thames whispering beneath our feet, its currents dragging secrets ever onward. Holmes lit a cigarette with hands that did not tremble. "One more knot cut, Watson," he said, "but the rope remains long." It was late the following afternoon when Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, weary from the long descent into London's subterranean chambers. The fog that had dogged the city for days had at last begun to lift, and a pale shaft of winter sun filtered in through the tall windows, touching the carpet with reluctant warmth. Holmes cast aside his coat, removed his boots with a sigh of relief, and took to the armchair with the air of a man both physically exhausted and mentally invigorated. He remained silent for some minutes, puffing thoughtfully at a pipe he had long neglected in the course of the affair. At last, he spoke. Not to me directly, but into the room, as if addressing the case itself. It was, I think, one of the most elegant systems I have yet encountered, Watson. Elegant and cold. I looked up from my notebook. You refer to the conspiracy itself. Indeed. Consider the elements involved. A hidden tunnel system thought obsolete, the acoustic manipulation of the tolling bell, the employment of coded phrases, and the planting of false anarchist trails to mislead any inquirer foolish enough to follow. And above all, the placement of a trusted official, Sir Alton Fenwick, as the fulcrum of it all, the very man charged with dismissing suspicion. You suspected him from the beginning? I suspected he knew more than he let on. His initial dismissal of Thwaite was too rehearsed, too polished. He was not surprised by the accusation. He was prepared for it. And that, Watson, is often more telling than outright denial. Holmes paused to tamp his pipe and continued. The note found in the drawer, the third toll, was not merely symbolic. The chimes of Big Ben, when heard from beneath Westminster Bridge, are refracted unevenly by the structure's curvature. The third toll in particular echoes off the stone of the third support pillar, amplifying in a way that only those below would recognise. It served as a rendezvous signal, both specific and deniable. And the anarchist lead? I inquired. A fiction, Holmes said flatly. One carefully seeded to discredit any premature investigation. The planted pamphlet, the coerced witness, both designed to cast Langley as a radical and thereby poison his credibility. It is a strategy long used in political subterfuge. Associate your enemy with something society already fears. I recalled the suspect we had questioned in Spitalfields and the nervous glances he had exchanged with his interrogator. You believe the man was paid? I believe he was threatened, and not idly. Those who operate within the machinery of such schemes rarely extend to bribery when intimidation serves just as well. Holmes rose then and fetched from his desk the fragments of Langley's diary. He laid them out before us once again, pointing to the coded entries with methodical precision. These were no idle musings. The mention of cathedral silence referred to a vault chamber beneath Parliament, where even footsteps fall dull. The toll's third voice, as we've said, was the echo. And the manifest signed by Langham was, I believe, a forged approval document that allowed materials to be moved through government hands without record. Langham, I might add, died some 6 years ago. Then how? Forgery, Watson, quietly affixed to authorise the passage of crates, dossiers, even men. I would wager much that our masked visitors arrived beneath Westminster through precisely such an arrangement. I stared at the papers in quiet astonishment. Then it was all real. The conspiracy, the threat to state security. Yes, Holmes replied grimly, and yet it shall never make the front page of the Times. Such is the nature of the game played in shadow. He turned to me with a faint smile. But that is not for us to remedy. We are merely the scalpel, not the surgeon. We cut, clean, and withdraw. And Thwaite? Holmes's smile faded. I trust he is now far from London, under another name and another roof. He shall not be troubled again. I leaned back in my chair, struck by the chill in Holmes's final words. The fog outside had lifted, but here within these walls, the weight of all we had uncovered still pressed heavily upon the air. The days that followed were curiously void of consequence. No headlines adorned the morning papers. No public official resigned. No mention of Sir Alton Fenwick's arrest was made in even the most speculative of broadsheets. The machinery of empire rolled forward with the same noise and gravity as before, as though the serpent we had unearthed had been quietly coiled back into the earth from whence it came. It was Lestrade who, with some delicacy, brought us word of the official outcome. "There will be no trial," he informed Holmes with a reluctant shrug. "Too great a risk. Parliament has chosen containment over spectacle. Sir Alton has been transferred to an overseas consulate, a medical pretext affixed to the record." "And the others?" I asked. "Langley's name will not appear again," Lestrade replied. "Nor Thwaites, nor his sisters. They've been sent abroad. New names, new lives. Witness protection by another name." Holmes merely nodded, as if it were all precisely as he expected. "It is not justice," I said, my voice betraying something between indignation and disappointment. "No," Holmes replied, "but it is balance. The Empire deals in appearances, Watson, and it will sacrifice blood or truth so long as the illusion remains intact. We have excised the danger. That is enough, for now." "And Sir Alton?" I pressed. "He will live," Holmes answered quietly, "in anonymity, stripped of honour, shackled by silence. Do not mistake it for mercy. He valued power above all. Now he has none." There was something deeply unsettling in the swiftness with which the matter had been buried, as if the nation itself had swallowed its own poison and then stitched the wound with whispered threads. But I understood, even if I could not approve. The truth, when it pertained to those who governed, was rarely allowed sunlight. Still, I could not help but wonder how many such things had Holmes uncovered, only to watch them vanish into the folds of official discretion. That evening, as Holmes sat once more before the fire, I found myself watching him, not as a comrade, nor as a chronicler, but as one might regard a man glimpsed in silhouette, real, yet distant, familiar, yet unreachable. "You are troubled," he said, without looking up. "I am thoughtful," I replied. He nodded. "There is little distinction in your case." I smiled faintly, but did not deny the charge. "It is a strange thing," I continued, "to know one has helped prevent a great harm, and yet to feel no triumph. I suppose I expected something grander, a moment of light breaking through the darkness. Instead, we are left with silence and shadows." Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe. "The work we do, Watson, seldom ends in fanfare. You desire clarity, moral certainty, but such things are rarely afforded to those who dwell in the fog. And yet you navigate it with ease." "No," he said, "only with purpose." There was a pause then. Long, not uncomfortable. I studied the profile of the man beside me, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the relentless machinery of his mind always churning beneath the surface. "Have you never grown weary of it?" I asked. "Of the secrets, the schemes, the weight of knowing?" Holmes's smile was almost imperceptible. "I do not chase knowledge for comfort, Watson. I chase it because it is there. Because something must." And with that he turned back to the fire, the flicker of the flames casting strange patterns across his face, as if the light itself could not quite decide what to make of the man it danced upon. We rose early the next morning. Holmes, ever drawn to the river in moments of closure, suggested we walk along the embankment. The fog had lifted, and the Thames, though grey and sluggish, bore a certain clarity that had eluded it days before. We stood for a while near Westminster Bridge, neither speaking, each perhaps lost in his own reckoning. "It is quiet now," I said at last. Holmes inclined his head slightly. "For the moment. Do you believe it is truly over?" He considered this for a long while, then turned his gaze to the river. "The Thames hides many secrets, Watson," he said, "but the truth always rises with the tide." And with that, he walked on, cane tapping, coat brushing lightly against the wind, while I followed, a step behind, carrying the weight of all we had seen and the silence that would follow it. As we made our way back through the narrow lanes of Westminster, I found Holmes unusually silent, his gaze cast not downward in thought, but outward, toward the river and the towers beyond it. At last I ventured, "Do you think, Holmes, that Sir Alton ever truly believed in the cause he served?" Holmes gave a faint smile, more bitter than amused. "Belief, Watson, is a convenient cloak for ambition. He hid behind patriotism, behind bureaucracy, but in truth, he simply desired control without scrutiny. The bridge, the tunnels, the toll, those were symbols of concealment. He thrived beneath them, in the unseen." He paused and turned to me. "But the irony, my dear fellow, is that the very silence he counted on became the echo that betrayed him." And now, dear readers, the question turns to you. What do you think was Sir Alton Fenwick's greatest mistake? Underestimating Holmes, overplaying his hand, or choosing the wrong allies beneath Westminster Bridge? Share your theories in the comments below. We'd love to know how you would have cracked the case. And if you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of the Empire, don't forget to subscribe for more Sherlock Holmes mysteries and share this story with fellow sleuths who love a good deduction. The game's still afoot. See you in the next case.